Welcome back guys, in this video we'll be exploring functions. So a function is a block of code that can be reused. fmt.println, which we've been using, is a function that takes the given value and prints it out onto the screen. So as you guys can see, I have some code right here that prints a poem to the screen. But let's say I wanted to print the poem 5 times. What I could do is just copy these lines of code like this, and then just paste 4 times. Now let's go ahead and run the code. And this works fine, but instead of having to copy and paste the code every time we want to print our poem, we can make a function. So let's go ahead and create a function that prints our poem. So first I'm just going to go ahead and delete this right here. And now to create our function, the first thing we have to do is type func. And func stands for function. Next we have to give our function a name. So I'm just going to name my function print poem. And then we just have to put 2 brackets just like this. And then right here we just put an open and close curly brackets. And we're going to put the function's code in between these 2 curly brackets. Let's just move the code that prints our poem from our main function into our print poem function. So now we're done creating our print poem function, but the code in our function won't be executed unless we call our function. So to call our function, all we have to do is just type print poem, just like this. Now let's go ahead and run our code. And as you can see, the code inside of our print poem function right here was executed. And we want to print our poem 5 times, so let's just call our function 5 times. So I'm just going to copy this right here and just paste it 1, 2, 3, 4 times. Now let's go ahead and run our code again. And as you can see, our code function is the same as what we had in the start, but it's a lot simpler since we're now using a function. So now we're going to cover parameters. Parameters allow us to pass values to functions. So let me show you what I mean. So as you can see, I have an empty addNumbers function, and I want the addNumbers function to add together 2 numbers and print them to the screen. We need to use parameters to allow our function to receive the 2 numbers we want to be added together. It might sound complicated, but don't worry, I'm going to break it down after we run our code. So in these 2 brackets right here, I'm just going to type num1 int, comma num2 int. And what this is saying is that we want our addNumbers function to take 2 integers. One will be named num1 and the other will be named num2. Then let's make our function print out num1 plus num2. So I'm just going to type fmt.println num1 plus num2. Now in our main function, let's call our addNumbers function and give it the values 1 and 3. So I'm just going to type addNumbers, and then in between these 2 brackets, I'm just going to put 1, comma 3. Now let's go ahead and run our code. And as you can see, the sum of 1 and 3 was printed. So what happened is when we called our addNumbers function, this first value 1 was assigned to num1, and this second value 3 was assigned to num2. So when our addNumbers function was executed, the num1 variable was equal to 1, and the num2 variable was equal to 3. And 1 plus 3 is 4, so that's why 4 was printed. The great thing about parameters is that we can use the same function and pass it different values. So right here, let's call our addNumbers function again. So I'm just going to type addNumbers, but then this time let's put 1, comma 1 in between these 2 brackets. Now let's run the code again, and as you guys can see, 4 was printed and then 2 was printed. And that's because the first time our addNumbers function's code was executed, num1 was equal to 1 and num2 was equal to 3. And the second time our addNumbers function was executed, num1 was equal to 1 and num2 was equal to 1. So now you guys know we can use parameters to give values to a function, but we can also receive values from a function using a return statement. So instead of printing out the sum, let's return the sum. It might sound a bit complicated, so let me show you what I mean. So the first thing we have to do to make our function return a value is specify the type of value our function will return. So right next to our parameters, I'm just going to type int. And that's because I want our addNumbers function to return an int. Now instead of printing num1 plus num2, let's return num1 plus num2. So I'm just going to delete this line of code right here. And I'm going to type return num1 plus num2. And I'm just going to delete this line of code right here since we don't need it. And what we want to do right here is store the value returned by our addNumbers function. So let's just type sum colon equals right here. So what this line of code right here is going to do is assign the value returned by our addNumbers function to our sum variable. Then down here, let's just type in fmt.println sum. Now let's go ahead and run the code. And as you can see, 4 was printed. And that's because sum is equal to 4, since our function returned the sum of num1 and num2, which is 4. Just like a function can have multiple parameters, a function can return multiple values. So let's make our function return the sum and product of the given numbers. So I'm just going to go ahead and change the name of our function from addNumbers to add and multiply numbers. Now instead of returning just 1 int, we want our function to return 2 ints. When we have a function that returns multiple values, we need to use brackets right here. So I'm just going to put brackets just like this. And we have to separate the returned types using commas. So let's just put comma int right here. So what this is saying is that our function will return 2 ints. Now right here, let's just type comma num1 times num2. So the first value returned will be num1 plus num2, and the second value returned will be num1 times num2. And right here where we have sum, let's just put comma product. And then we also need to change this to add and multiply. So what this is going to do is assign the first returned value, which is num1 plus num2, to sum. And it's going to assign the second returned value, which is num1 times num2, to product. So then in our print statement, let's also just add comma product. Now let's go ahead and run the code. And as you can see, the sum and product of 1 and 3 was printed. But let's say that we only wanted to print the sum. So let's just delete product from our print statement right here. Now let's run our code. And as you can see, we got an error, product declared and not used. What we can do to fix this is just replace product right here with underscore. And this tells Go that we don't need the second value returned. Now let's run the code again, and as you can see, it works as expected. And we can also do this the other way around. So let's print product instead of sum. So let's just remove sum from our print statement right here and just type product. And then where we have sum, let's just put an underscore and let's put product back right here. Now let's go ahead and run the code. And as you guys can see, only the product was printed. Right now we're using unnamed return values, but we can also use named return values. And to use named return values, the first thing we have to do is give names to our returned values. So I'm going to name our first returned value sum. So I'm just going to type sum right here. And I'm going to name our second return value product, so I'm just going to type product right here. And this creates a sum and product variable that will automatically be returned. So now inside of our function, let's just type sum equals num1 plus num2. And let's also type product equals num1 times num2. And where we have return right here, we can just delete all of this. And the reason that we can delete that is because our function is now going to automatically return our named variables, which in our case is sum and product. And let's just put sum back here and also put sum back here. And then let's just go ahead and run our code. And as you can see, it printed the sum and product as expected. Also, there's something we can do to make our code a little bit cleaner. Since our function returns two values of the same type, we can just go ahead and delete int right here. And that's because when you only give a type to the last returned value, all other returned values are automatically given the type of the last returned value. So in our case, since only the last returned value is given a type of int, all of the other returned values will be given a type of int. And we can also do the same thing for the parameters, so we can just go ahead and delete int right here. And since our last parameter was given a type of int, all other parameters are automatically going to be given a type of int. We can also use defer, and what defer does is automatically call a function at the end of a function. So let me go ahead and show you. So as you guys can see, I have a greet function right here that prints out hello. fmt.println is a function, so we can use it with defer. So right here, before our greet function prints out hello, let's just type defer fmt.println by. And let's just call our greet function in our main function, just like this. Now let's go ahead and run the code. And as you can see, by was printed at the end of our greet function. And that's because this println statement right here was deferred. Let's try adding another println. So down here, let's just type fmt.println, my name is Alice. Now let's run the code again. And as you can see, this line of code right here was still executed last since it's deferred. The last thing I'm going to be covering in this video is the scope of variables. So as you guys can see, we have a function print age right here, and we've also declared an age variable right here. Notice how this age variable isn't declared inside of a function. This means that age is a global variable. And when creating global variables, you can't use the colon equal syntax. So you have to use var, just like this. Because age is a global variable, we can access it inside of all functions here. That's why we can use it here in our main function and also here in our printAge function. Now let's go ahead and run the code. And as you can see, our printAge function was able to print age right here, and our main function was also able to print age right here. Now let's delete this line of code right here, and let's declare age in our main function. So I'm just going to type age colon equals 20. Now let's go ahead and try run the code again. And as you guys can see, we got an error. It says undefined age. And that's because since the age variable is declared in the main function, you can't use it directly in other functions. In this case, age isn't a global variable, it's a local variable. Let's try creating another age variable in our printAge function. So let's type age colon equal 25. Now let's go ahead and run the code again. And as you can see, 25 was printed by our printAge function and 20 was printed by our main function. And that's because we have two separate age variables. One is defined inside of the main function and one is defined in the printAge function. Let's also try adding another global age variable. So let's go up right here and type var age equals 100. Now let's run the code. And as you can see, 100 wasn't printed anywhere. That's because if you have a global variable and a local variable with the same name, the local variable will be used. So let's go ahead and delete our age variable right here in our printAge function. Now let's go ahead and run the code. And as you can see, our printAge function printed 100. And that's because there's no longer any local variable with the name age. So earlier we learned about using return with functions, and I'd really appreciate if you like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you can return to my channel in the future.